Hi, I'm Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome to Resiliency Matters. What if you could learn from a man who served 26 years in the British Army? Would you spend the next 28 minutes with us? What if in the next 10 minutes you could hear how he overcame serious battle wounds? Would you hang out with us? Who is us? My other half today is David Richmond. David has led and served in extraordinary ways, including as an Army officer, developing support services for over 18,000 members of the UK military community, and consulting with other countries on developing their own support services. We are grateful that he has been a close collaborator with the National Resilience Institute and is part of the development of our work into a new nonprofit, Worldmaker International. So welcome, David.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So let's start with that day that you were wounded in battle.
Yeah, I was in a town in central Helmand in Afghanistan called Musakala. We were conducting a battle group operation, and pretty much in the middle of it, I was shot by a Taliban round, which went in through the back of my right leg and out through the front, and sadly took 10 centimeters of my right femur with it. So very quickly, a lot of the aspirations and the intent I had for that day for the career sort of turned on its head, and life took a very different turn after that.
You say turn on a sixpence, we say turn on a dime.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Turn on a dime. Yeah.
We straightened that out yesterday. So what was that recovery? What did that look like?
It was a long old period. It was 4 years in total, actually. So I was very lucky they didn't take my leg off. They very nearly did in Afghanistan, but didn't. I was then given the choice when I got home. I got back to the hospital in the UK. And it was a much easier choice than some people think, because you do only get 2 legs. So by definition, the last thing you do is take one of them off. But it was 4 years of reconstructive surgery and rehabilitation, which was not an easy journey by any stretch of the imagination. And there were lots of setbacks. But it worked. You work hard. I worked hard. And I sort of reaped the benefits of that long rehab and recovery and the investment of the surgery. I reap those benefits now rather than then.
And when you say longer recovery, I have the benefit of knowing that backstory, but they actually broke your leg 7 times in order to repair it.
Yes, yes. Because there was a lot of damage, they fitted metalwork around my leg, and it took so long the first time to fit the metalwork that they didn't want to do the breaks, and they had to do 2 breaks, one above and below the wound site, in order to grow the bone back to the original length. But they then did it a second time. So they then took me into surgery a second time to do the breaks. The breaks then healed over before I had time to start turning the screws on the frame, so I had to break them again. Then later on down the line, actually my leg bent, so I had to have it broken again and more metalwork put back on. So it was a lot. It was always going to be a long process, but it was at least a year longer than it might have been had everything gone to plan. So I think it sort of tests some of your inner steeliness and your own resilience, and also actually the resilience of your family around you, because they ride the whole roller coaster with you.
Absolutely.
You've heard me describe them as my sort of stabilizers. And when you have a wobble, they're the people who help prop you back up again. Sometimes an encouraging word, sometimes a rather sterner word, but actually you know they're there, and that's really good.
Mm-hmm. And so you had an opportunity on the other side of this to develop recovery services for veterans. You had that understanding that it's so much more than just the military personnel, but that the families included.
Yeah.
Talk about the nonprofit that you developed.
Yeah, so I joined an organization called Help for Heroes, and at that point it was just a fundraising and grant giving charity. And they wanted to deliver services to support wounded servicemen coming through, and families, crucially. We set up a holistic service, that's a wraparound service, where we tried to put as many services as reasonably possible under one roof to reduce the number of signposts you had to make and the number of contacts you had to make. And that involved, in the end, 8 services, ones we thought we could do as well, if not better than somebody else, or they didn't already exist. Because if somebody else was doing them really well already, why reinvent it? So we partnered with those guys, those organizations. And we included families in the mix, because of course we felt that so much effort and so much focus is on the wounded individual that so often the family is forgotten, but actually their life has just changed too. So we supported them, and we created fellowship groups both for the men and for the wounded guys and girls and for the families. I mean, a very loose definition of family, because what's a traditional family? And what's normal now is not what was normal 30 years ago. So we had a very loose definition of family. And the fellowship was so important, actually, with all the other services, which were to some of them the welfare team or the grant giving team or the psychological team, and there were a range of others, had very sort of episodic engagement. They engaged for a purpose and for a very clear outcome. The fellowship team pulled the whole thing together, and they would develop a really warm relationship with people, which meant that they would laugh with them, they'd cry with them, they'd hug them, they'd give them a cuff on the ear every now and then when they needed one. They were always there. They were often the first point of contact, and very often they were the ones who got the agonized phone call from people who were having a hard time. They would get it first. And that team was so important.
And that's so consistent with the resilience research, and a key message that NRI tries to sing from the mountaintops, that resilience is relationship-based, and that we have to understand that that is where it starts, and people heal people. And
this was about relationships. And wounding, injury or illness, I think actually whether you're a serviceman or a civilian, doesn't matter. It's very isolating. You're suddenly divorced from the team that you were part of. And over time, while of course the guys are still supporting you, it becomes more distant, and you're not part of them anymore. You can't take part in all the things. And therefore recreating to some degree the camaraderie and the fellowship that surrounds that close-knit team became a really key factor in what we did. So I think in many ways that was the key service, but the one which had arguably the least tangible outcome, but it was the one that held it all together.
Exactly, the glue.
Yeah.
You also have served as the UK team director for the Invictus Games. Talk about lessons learned there, or maybe educate Americans of what is the Invictus Games.
The Invictus Games were Prince Harry's initiative to bring together an international games for wounded, injured and sick, or wounded, injured and ill, as the Americans say, servicemen and veterans. We had a UK team. UK hosted the first games, and then I was team director for the first 3 games. And I think it really highlighted on an international stage that veterans are still there, that wounds are carried way beyond the first few months, that if you've lost your sight or your mind or your leg or whatever it is, just because the war has ended doesn't mean to say that's growing back. It's not. So it keeps it in the public mind. But it was so important and we had placed huge emphasis on this with the UK team, that the Invictus Games was a waypoint. It was part of your journey. It was not the end. And to use it as a catalyst to push you forward into whatever it is you're going to do next. Take all those experiences, all those contacts, all that exposure, and use it to your benefit going forwards. And I think that's the power of the games, rather than the games itself, which is a huge event.
It really is, and such an important lesson. So our tool number 1, resilience does not mean being stronger alone. Resilience is developed by getting support from people you trust. Lessons in resilience from 26 years of Army service. Stay tuned.
After the rain stops and the wind dies down, when the fire's gone out and the dust settles, we rise up together and become a force of nature all our own. As part of this community, MediaCom stands with you, doing everything we can not only to restore your service, but to help provide emergency communication access, assist relief efforts, and support our neighbors.
AT&T loves to talk about their 1 gig internet, but you can't get it at Beth's house or John's house. It's not available in JoJo's neighborhood or within 100 miles of the Smith family. The truth is, AT&T 1 gig isn't for everyone. Make sure you have access to the fastest. Switch to MediaCom Extreme and get the future-forward speed you need from the 100% gigabit technology network, the fastest for everyone. CenturyLink loves to talk about their 1 gig internet, but you can't get it at Beth's house or John's house. It's not available in JoJo's neighborhood or within 100 miles of the Smith family. The truth is, CenturyLink 1 gig isn't for everyone. Make sure you have access to the fastest. Switch to MediaCom Extreme and get the future-forward speed you need from the 100% gigabit technology network, the fastest for everyone.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome back to Resiliency Matters. Today we are speaking with David Richmond. David, you have that CBE behind your name. Tell us what that, I know it's Commander of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire.
Yeah.
Even fancier. Interpret that for we Americans.
Yeah, it's an honour. It's a great thing. It's an honour given by the Queen for public service, and I received it in 2012. Essentially for my work with the wounded, injured and ill community while I was still in the army, because I was the senior British officer wounded, so I sort of had a response. I became their sort of unofficial leader, if you like, which is a role I was very happy to take. But that was it comes with a great day at the palace. I was very lucky it was the Queen herself who was there to present it. The wonderful thing is your family can go to, and the palace, as Buckingham Palace can do, they do it supremely well, so that it becomes a very special day, and it's a wonderful thing to have received.
Excellent. And we met, I found you through the Royal Foundation has an initiative called the Heads Together initiative, such important work, and we're going to give a website so our viewers can find their way there. Talk about the work of the Heads Together. Yeah,
Heads Together was pulled together by the Royal Foundation, which really engages the 4 prominent young royals, so Prince Harry and now Meghan, and Prince William and Kate. Of course, at the start, it was just 3 of them because Meghan wasn't on the scene in that sense. But they wanted to raise the profile of mental health in the UK, but also in a way that would reduce stigma and let people know that actually there are lots of really well-known people, as well as quite normal people, who are suffering or have suffered, or members of their family have suffered from mental health challenges. So it brought together 8 charities. Contact, which I chaired, was a federation, a loose federation of military charities, the Ministry of Defence, the National Health Service and so on, and some academic partners came together as one of those partners. And it brought together everybody from veterans to people working to prevent male suicide, from young mums to young children and the youth. So the charities covered a broad spread. And I think it did a really good job of highlighting the issues, changing the nature of the conversation in the UK, so it became more normal to talk about mental health. And of course it used this extraordinary convening power that the royal family have to bring people together, to gain publicity and to do good. And they were properly engaged. They didn't just lend their name to it. They read into it, they were engaged with it, and they were well informed about it, and they steered it too. So I think that was, from the inside, one of the most impressive things, that it wasn't just put your face on here, say a few nice words, and leave us to get on with it. They wanted to be involved, and they're involved in a really positive way.
And that involvement continues. So again, I encourage our viewers to keep your eye on those resources because they continue to grow, and some fabulous.
And it meant the charities themselves, we learned from each other. So the collaboration, which was the bonds of collaboration which were formed there, will have an enduring effect for years to come.
And speaking of collaboration, you and I have been, well, last month we were in Toronto, and then last week we were at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, and yesterday you gave a wonderful training for our local community, which we greatly appreciated, on leadership and cultures of resilience. But when we were at Fort Sam Houston, a joint base in San Antonio, there were a couple questions that, after your presentation, that really struck me. And one of those, I believe the general asked this himself. He said, you know, we know you had dark days. We know you had days of despair. In those darkest moments, what was it that allowed you to continue moving forward?
I think there were a variety of things. Although if you'd asked me, was I thinking about it in this way at the time, I wasn't, but I know what they were now in hindsight. You know, so I think I wanted, there was a hope. You know, things could get better. There was a long way to go to make them better, that they could get better. And I've held tight to that. I held tight to where I wanted to be. You know, the sort of what I describe sometimes as the big prize. You know, I held tight to the fact I wanted to be able to play with my children again. I wanted to be active. You know, to be able to ride a bike and run and all those sort of things. And I wanted to go back to service. I managed the first 3, didn't manage the 4th, but actually that's not too bad. And then around that, with the dark days, so that's what powered me forward. But the days when you think, oh, this is really, and the setbacks you have, Having a really supportive family is so important. Having a network of friends who you can rely on and trust and who know you well enough to have an honest conversation. And also drawing inspiration from all the other young men and women who I would look around at our rehabilitation centre and think, actually, you know, if they can do it, I can do it. Why can't, you know, why not? And then I think it's so important to invest. The only person who can do your rehab is you. This is not something somebody else can do for you. And if you really want this, you need to invest in it. And I think that's a sort of mental flick that some people really struggle with. They feel the medical community can just mend them, and then all of a sudden you'll be well again. But it doesn't work like that. You know, they can do what they can do, but you need to invest in it. It's your body, it's your life. So work hard. And I see the benefits of it 10 years later. If you'd asked me on certain days 10 years or 11 years ago, how's it going? I'd think, well, I'm not really very sure. But actually, you know, you see it now. And I say to young people now who are going through something similar, I walk around pretty normally. I can run and I ride a bike and all that kind of stuff because I worked really hard 10 years ago. It wasn't luck. It wasn't just the surgeon's knife. It was a personal investment. And you need to do that. It's not going to happen otherwise.
And you not only came back to a point you run and you bike, but you set a goal to do an Ironman,
Yeah.
and then you did another Ironman.
Yes, yeah.
So to give, again, our
Yeah.
viewers a sense of...
Yeah, another moment of madness. Yeah, it was for me. That's the one thing I did for me. I needed to do something to prove to myself that I was, you know, I was back. Okay, my leg's not the same. I can't do all the things I used to do, but if I can do an Ironman, it can't be that bad, can it? And so that's what that was about. And like all these endurance events, like so many things in life, most of it's up here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Here and the people that surround us.
Yeah.
We always have
Yeah.
to keep those two things together. Another great question I thought that was asked at Fort Sam Houston was a woman who stood up and said, how can I help someone who, you know, we all have maybe a higher level of resilience. We've worked on it and built it up. How do we help those that really are struggling and in that moment aren't exhibiting a high level of resilience?
Yeah, I think it was a great question. It was I thought, oh, this is a killer question, this one. But it's such a good question because not everybody starts from a good place of resilience. And I think my view on it is that it starts with a relationship, a trusting relationship, and it moves from there into small steps, little steps. Build that trust, build the confidence. Don't try and eat the elephant all at once is the sort of analogy, I suppose. Take a little bite that might just build some confidence and build some hope and some self-belief. And I think one of the things you can do is believe in them. It's very difficult to believe in yourself if nobody's going to believe in you. And if they can see you believe in them, that's a good start, good place to start. And then I think there's an analogy I used, which was there's this combination lock that the person who's struggling, they don't know the combination and you don't know the combination. And you sort of, between you sort of sit and tap these keys trying to find out the right numbers. And then suddenly the lights will go on. And you don't really know why, but they just went on. Something has sparked them. And there's a couple of examples I could offer, which is one, a young guy who lost both legs and much of his behind to an IED at the age of 19. He was getting fat and getting angry and a bit lost in the sort of misery of it all, and for good reason. And he's now an international para-triathlete because what turned his lights on suddenly was an Ironman. Well, who'd have thought that? Why? And I can think of somebody else who's not in a sporting environment who was introduced to beekeeping and the lights went on. And he now sells his own honey and runs his own, I don't know, whatever you call a group of bees, I suppose. but there's two people you think, well, okay, at the start, would you have known beekeeping and triathlon? No, you wouldn't, but it worked. So those options have real purpose. And some people, sometimes the funders say, well, why are you doing that? It doesn't make any sense. That's why you do it, because you don't know what's going to turn those lights on, what's the combination setting.
Such a powerful analogy, a combination lock, to be using that as you go to support others and help them find a way forward. Your belief in others is an important gift. We can all nurture the talents and ambitions of others and help them through times of doubt and uncertainty. Essentials for growing your leadership. Stay tuned.
After the rain stops and the wind dies down, when the fire's gone out and the dust settles, we rise up together and become a force of nature all our own. As part of this community, MediaCom stands with you, doing everything we can not only to restore your service, but to help provide emergency communication access, assist relief efforts, and support our neighbors.
AT&T loves to talk about their 1 gig internet, but you can't get it at Beth's house or John's house. It's not available in JoJo's neighborhood or within 100 miles of the Smith family. The truth is, AT&T 1 gig isn't for everyone. Make sure you have access to the fastest. Switch to MediaCom Extreme and get the future-forward speed you need from the 100% gigabit technology network, the fastest for everyone. CenturyLink loves to talk about their 1 gig internet, but you can't get it at Beth's house or John's house. It's not available in JoJo's neighborhood or within 100 miles of the Smith family. The truth is, CenturyLink 1 gig isn't for everyone. Make sure you have access to the fastest. Switch to MediaCom Extreme and get the future-forward speed you need from the 100% gigabit technology network, the fastest for everyone.
Welcome back to Resiliency Matters. Today we are speaking with David Richmond, and behind your title there, David, we have you listed as COO of Worldmaker International, and that is a new initiative that grew out of the work of the National Resilience Institute and then more international collaborations. Talk about this work, and we just had our first board meeting in San Antonio. Talk about the work and why it matters.
The Worldmaker brings people together with expertise to help communities around the world become more resilient. And I think in a nutshell, that's where it is. And I think resilience is so important now, and it's become much more of a topic of conversation now around lots of sectors of the community, because the world's changed around us so quickly between the switch from an analog world to digital world, weather events and natural disasters, the divide between rich and poor, population migrations, all these things are placing huge pressures and stresses on individuals and communities. And I think it's important that the people who can help do help. And the expertise is there. I think Worldmaker can leverage the expertise from the network it has and help these people in those communities. And it's good work. It's work that can have a very tangible benefit and an enduring benefit. It's so important this sort of work is not fire and forget, one engagement and then we go away. Actually, we can equip people with tools which will help them through what will be undoubtedly difficult times. And everybody and every community will go through difficult times. So I think that's why it's so important. And if you can help, why wouldn't you help? I think there's a duty on those people who are lucky enough to have pretty secure lives and pretty secure environments to live in and are well qualified and experienced. But there's a duty to support those who are perhaps less well placed. And Worldmaker, I think, positions itself right there.
And you bring so much expertise to the work itself in resilience building. You also bring incredible value to organizational development and leadership. And one thing you focus on really strongly, I've learned from you, is focus on the solutions, not the problems. Talk about this.
I think in my experience of the different parts of the military world, the not-for-profit world, and also the world I've been in the last couple of years, which is more the commercial business world, you continually come across lots of people who are expert in the problem. Because being an expert in the problem is really quite straightforward. You can see it, you can touch it, you can sort of define it, and you can define it ever more closely, and you can poke it and prod it, and you can make yourself feel quite clever by being real expert in this. But that's all very well, but what are you going to do about it? And I think that where leaders operate is they operate beyond the problem. They operate in the space which is the solution. And of course, you need to understand the problem to design the solution. So I'm not saying forget the problem altogether. But let's not analyze it to a point where we're going blue in the face. Let's move beyond this. And a key role of a leader is to find those solutions and to bring people with him on those solutions. And but definitely draw on the expertise of the people around him or her to develop those solutions and then deliver them.
So when you were in San Antonio, you talked about your favorite leadership book and some lessons that some of your favorite lessons from it. Give us a bit of background of what the book is, why the people were qualified to write it, and some of those lessons.
Yeah, it's called Legacy, 15 Lessons in All Black Leadership. And I love it because it's so clear. It's written in such clear and concise terms. And also has such evident value, and it so evidently works. So the All Blacks rugby team are the New Zealand international rugby team. They are the most successful sporting team in sporting history in any sport anywhere in the world. And over a history of over 100 years, well over 100 years, they've got an 88% win rate. Now that's not just because they've got some good players today and had some good players then. It's not just because they're well funded, because in terms of international rugby, they're not the best funded team. And it's not just because it's their national sport, because we've got lots of national sports and don't have that success. It's, I think, as the book sets out, they have a set of values which guide them through time. And one of them is you're never too big to do the small jobs. So senior people in the team, they talk about sweeping the sheds. They clean their own changing room. They don't walk past things and get somebody else to do it. About handing the shirt over in a better place. About being a good ancestor and planting trees you'll never sit underneath. And all those sorts of things. So it's just some wonderful values that I think has guided them. That's at the heart of their success. Not the fact they happen to have some good players. Lots of teams have got good players.
And we also have talked a lot about collaboration, because Worldmaker International is truly a collaboration focused on evidence-based solutions to build resilience in communities around the world. What's your take on collaboration?
Collaboration is key. In a world where we're so interconnected, more interconnected than we've ever been, we have to collaborate. But collaboration doesn't mean I come to the table saying I want to collaborate, but actually what I want to do is get you to do what I want. That's not collaboration. That's just nonsense. So if you want to collaborate, you need to collaborate around a shared goal. Shared values also help, and a genuine sense that everybody has something to collaborate, to contribute, and there is a win-win in this for everybody. It's not a win-lose thing. There's so much we see in our society today is about chest beating and win-lose. I win, you lose. That's not collaboration. That's just bullying. This is, and actually it doesn't work long term. So we're into collaboration where we're finding the win-win for everybody, and we're finding a solution which will work for everybody.
Excellent. I knew our time would go too fast, and darn it has. So here's tool number 3. Leadership has never been more important, and it is for all of us. In order to thrive in today's complex world, we each must ask, what role can I play, and how can I help? Thank you so much, David, for joining us on Resiliency Matter. And thank you, viewers, for joining us on Resiliency Matters on MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.